at the point with this country that, like, all this 4th of July decorations doesn't sit well with me, because we're at a point where the American flag on any piece of anything, hanging from your house, on your shirt, hanging from your fucking car, on a sticker on your car, whatever, it looks racist. Like, the fact that it was the symbol of, like, the protests against masks, and it was the symbol for all lives matter and blue lives matter. It's like, it screams racist to me. It screams colonizer. It screams, I don't season my food. You know what I'm saying? So, I don't want to celebrate 4th of July anymore. 4th of July is officially canceled. I'm tired of seeing the fucking 13 colonies flags everywhere in California when we're not a fucking 13th colony. Also, 4th of July is overrated. Fuck fireworks. And thanks for coming to my TikTok.
Well, there you have it. The left, who always claims not to hate America, has taken the time on the 4th of July to do nothing but, of course, rail against the holiday, right? Talk about how racist and terrible the 4th really is. My name is James. This is Heavyweight Politics. I hope you've all had a great 4th of July weekend, ignoring all these idiots that, of course, are posting all this ridiculous stuff on Twitter. I know I, for one, enjoyed it. I got to see a hot air balloon show, got to see some fireworks. First 4th of July I got to spend with my newborn son, right? Just a good time. And, of course, while we were outside having a great time, these people on Twitter were doing nothing but posting how awful the 4th of July is, how terrible it is, how racist it is. And even NPR has come out and said that the Declaration of Independence is filled with racist language. So we got a Twitter thread here from NPR, and I am using the post-millennial just because they have it laid out very well. So NPR tweeted, 245 years ago today, leaders representing the 13 British colonies signed a document to declare independence. It says that all men are created equal, but women, enslaved people, and indigenous people, and many others were not held as equal at the time. Well, no duh, right? It is the beginning of the country, right? It set the foundations, right? This Declaration of Independence, it sets the foundations so that we can move in a better route going towards the future, right? It laid the framework for us to move forward. That's what we talk about Declaration of Independence for, right? All the great stuff that's listed in it that we look to when we want to do stuff like, in segregation, right? People like Martin Luther King quoted the Declaration of Independence constantly. Frederick Douglass, right? He quoted Declaration of Independence and the Constitution constantly. Abolitionists, as well as people who were, anti-segregationists, they were all quoting the Constitution and Declaration of Independence, pointing to those great words inside as the reasoning for why changes needed to occur. All right, that's what we celebrate about the Declaration of Independence. We know there were some problems at the time. What we celebrate is the message it left to allow us to fix those problems moving forward. But let's keep going here. So this document also includes a racist slur against indigenous Americans. Ooh, what's so racist in I don't remember anything racist in the Declaration of Independence. So we need to kind of go forward here a little bit. So yeah, author David Troyer, who's I can't say that, says there are a lot of diversity of opinions and thought among Native Americans, a community of more than 5 million people, about the document's words. Well, yes. So, but what are the words, right? What are the words? In this thread, in the Declaration of Independence, you can see the document is flawed and deeply ingrained hypocrisy. It also laid the foundations for the country's collective aspirations and hopes for America could be. It's not really ingrained hypocrisy entirely. People want to call it hypocrisy because the people who signed the documents, of course, owned slaves while talking about the freedom of people, right? The reality is most of them who were responsible for writing the Declaration of Independence as well as the Constitution were anti-slavery, right? The big part of it here is that they had to make sure that the South were on their side, who were heavily slave owners, or else they would not have fought off against the British. That's the big issue. Even people like Thomas Jefferson, who they say, well, he had slaves. Well, actually, in many of these states, it was actually against the law to free your slaves. And even upon your death, there were still very much restrictions about how many slaves you could free, or if you could even free them at all, depending on what state you lived. So to sit there and say, well, they had slaves, well, you have to understand the laws at the time were different, and you couldn't just free your slaves a lot of times, right? But they did, again, put in the framework so we could end it. And they wrote, again, when you read their own documents, many of these people who we criticize constantly were very anti-slavery in many ways, right? They constantly talked about the idea that there is a problem with a country that recognizes the freedom of all people who enslaves other people. They realized this, which is why they wrote it down there so that later on down the road they could hopefully be changed. That is the brilliance of our founding fathers when it came to all this. But here's a bit that they're talking about being racist. Here's a part where they say the racist slur against Native Americans. And has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers, the merciless Indian savages, whose known rule of warfare is undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. So, I take it they have a problem with saying Indian savages, right? Well, for one, calling them an Indian isn't exactly a slur. It's just kind of a misinterpretation, right? They kind of just thought they were somewhere else, and the name kind of just stuck, right? That's not really a slur. That's just kind of more of a misunderstanding, and not really that big of a deal, right? That's not racist, right? That's not racist in the least. But of course, what they're pointing probably to more so is savages. Well, I kind of hate to say it, but they were kind of savages. All right, they were definitely savages. You can't argue the fact that they weren't. They were at the lowest level of the tech tree. All right, they hadn't even invented the wheel. All right, they hadn't invented the wheel. They were still using stones, for God's sake, right? Their arrows were made of stones. They hadn't even invented, any proper forgery to make metals. You could have taken Julius Caesar, brought him over 1,000 years into the future and dropped them in North America, and he still would have said these people were savages. All right, that is how low in the tech tree we're talking about. They had tribes, the tribes over in Texas especially, cannibals who performed ritual cannibalism. They had yet to move out of the point of just civilization, growth to a point where they stopped cannibalizing people. All right, these are the people we're talking about. Now, that's not to say they're stupid. All right, they weren't. All right, there's this kind of, I think this kind of fallacy where they go, if you bring an ancient person in today's time, they wouldn't understand a thing. I think Native Americans actually proved that wrong. All right, because we sat there and took Native Americans from the Stone Age to literal cavemen and gave them firearms and showed them what society was at that time, and they had full understanding. They adapted, right? And look what the Comanche did, right? They took horses, a creature they had never seen before. They took horses and firearms, and they managed to conquer so many other Native American tribes through the middle of the country, right? The Comanche were just... To say they adapted to warfare with the new materials that came in would be an understatement. They just dominated, which is part of why we have, kind of a reverence for them, right? Because they were just amazing warriors, and they conquered so much of other native tribes, which again dispels this whole myth that, it was only the colonizers who really conquered. No, natives conquered each other all the time. All right, and it doesn't really matter, people say, well, it's a lot worse. They came across the sea to conquer, this was just local skirmishes. Listen, there's no difference between me crossing a sea and then you crossing a mountain, right? Either way, if you're conquering, you're conquering. And natives conquered each other all the time before we arrived. The only difference is we were the best at it. Why? Because we had better weapons and we had civilization, and we also brought a bunch of diseases by accident, which unfortunately wiped out like 90% of their 99% of their population. It's terrible, but it's the truth, right? That's not even... the genocide of the natives was not a genocide. There was no intentional killing off of all of these natives for the most part. It was kind of all accident because we didn't understand, and neither did the natives, mind you. No one understood the idea of how diseases traveled, right? So that's not, I don't think you can really call a disease a genocide when people didn't even understand disease at the time period. But the point I'm trying to make here is, again, the natives were at that point savages. All right, they had yet to invent the wheel. There were still many tribes that practiced ritual cannibalism. They had yet to invent any form of armor or sword or spear or any of this stuff, right? They were still using rocks. Right? They were still using rocks for warfare. That is how low in the technology tree they are. If you're playing Civilization, they're your bare minimum. They're your bottom rung of technology. And in fact, I think for that game, they might actually still be below even that, right? It is astounding that people would even think that saying that they were savages at that time period would at all be offensive. All right? Because it's just not. It's the truth. It's just the truth. All right, cannibals, no wheel, no, still using rocks. What else do you want? They're still living in caves in many areas. They were cavemen. They were nomadic tribes. They were savages. Now, of course, once you introduce them to civilization, guess what? They adapted. They adapted. Why? Because just because you're low on the tech tree doesn't mean you're stupid, right? I don't understand half the crap that's in front of me right now with like my 3 screens and this microphone and the lighting. I don't understand probably any of it. I don't even understand probably a percentage of what it takes to put all this stuff together. I'm standing on the backs of other people who have done this work for me. So if you took a native, or if you took someone who was a caveman and brought them up here and took time and talked with them and kind of worked with them, I feel like they could probably eventually get to a point where they could understand all this. And I think natives showed that, right? When they again brought firearms and brought civilization to North America, what did they do? Well, they adapted incredibly quick. Again, like I said, the Comanche took horses and firearms and conquered over just large swaths of land and put up a hell of a fight even when, Americans started encroaching on the Comanche territory, right? They adapted. They adapted because just because saying someone is at that point savage or on the low end of the tech tree, they were cavemen, doesn't mean they're stupid. It just means they did not adapt, they did not change on their own. They had to be shown this stuff, and then guess what? They changed. They adapted. They are not stupid, but they were on the low end of the tech tree, and by any standard, they were savages. This isn't a racist thing. This is simply a truth. This is simply a factual statement. And the fact that we're now having, they put an editor's note saying contains a racist slur against indigenous people. Again, I don't know if they're talking about Indian or savages because these days they say Indian is a racial slur. Again, that's more just a misunderstanding than anything else. I frankly do prefer the term Native American. I think it makes more sense. But is it really that big of a deal that in a founding document they still call them Indians? I mean, really, that's what we're going to get over? Savages? Well, they were savages. There's nothing controversial about anything in that document. Not a thing is controversial in the Declaration of Independence. That's part of why it holds the test of time. Because all it does is have values that are, I don't want to say universal because it isn't universal, right? Many people don't hold these values. But it does have these values that have paved the path for us to accomplish so much in this country. From, of course, the freeing of the slaves, to ending of segregation, to more freedoms of speech. I mean, remember, at the time of the country's founding, there were different rules and regulations about what you could and couldn't say. Now we're at a point where, we're almost too free in some ways, right? Which is a great thing. We should be free. We should be free to, again, think what we want to think and say what we want to say. And it's thanks to these founding documents that we have these rights, that we have this ability, right? These people on the left don't get that. And what I will say is, normally we would say that, well, this is the extremists. These are the crazies, right? Only, people on the far left would really say that Declaration of Independence is racist. But this is NPR. This is mainstream. About as mainstream can get. Or this is people on CNN, this is people on MSNBC, this is people on mainstream media talking about how it's racist. It's funny, they like to point out, all the crazies on the right. And let's face it, on the right we do have some crazies. There's no doubt about it. But they are on the fringes. They truly are on the fringes. You don't see those crazies on the right getting the mainstream appeal that these crazies on the left get. Right? You're not going to see Ben Shapiro spout, some crazy nonsense on the far right. You're not going to see Tucker Carlson say it. You're not going to see, Charlie Kirk or Sean Hannity. You're not going to see any of those people really saying anything too unhinged at all. They're very mainstream in their own thoughts, right? They're very normal. Yet on MSNBC, you have constant just extreme leftism. You have NPR same way, you have CNN the same way. All these people, these are mainstream outlets spouting far left and extreme ideals. All right, these are mainstream people saying this stuff, and which is why we have to make sure we continue to fight, and why we got to make sure we continue to point out how idiotic this stuff is, how much, just how these guys are just total loons, right? They even think these things. We got to laugh at them. We got to make fun of them. We got to, poke the bear a little bit and just kind of, kind of enjoy it, right? Because I think, a few people have said, how can you be too pessimistic when people who are this dumb are the people who are in charge, right? And these are the people in charge. NPR, CNN, MSNBC, these are mainstream, which means they're in charge. And they are saying things that are this idiotic. At a point, we should be fearful of that in the sense of the far left now has now become mainstream. But we should also, I think, take some solace in the fact of the people leading these people are this dumb. The people who are leading these people are this ignorant. These are people who've never read a historical document in their life. Now, I got a big library in front of me. I got a small one behind me that's more of just my, show-off library. I read quite a bit, and I'm a nobody. I guarantee you I read more than these people do. I guarantee you, I'm guessing you probably read more than whoever wrote this article for NPR does. All right, these are people who don't read, who don't research, who don't have any critical thinking ability, and they're the ones who are in the mainstream and kind of leading the movement. So at one hand, yeah, we should be feeling kind of bad and down about the fact of just how far, our country's fallen in that regard. But in our instance, maybe we should be kind of happy. Take a moment to make fun of them, joke about it. The fact of, listen, these are the leaders of the left right now. These people who haven't ever read a single historical document, who literally know nothing, who are ignorant as can be, are the ones leading. That should make us feel at least a little bit more secure in our own position, I think. Either way, thank you so much for watching. If you have enjoyed it, please make sure you do subscribe, like the video. It really does help. And comment below if there's, anything you want to say, or what did you do on the 4th of July? Really, comment below. What did you do on the 4th of July? Again, I saw hot air balloons, saw fireworks. It was fantastic. What did you do on the 4th of July? Comment that below. And we'll see you again later.